Hello, today I'm going to show you how I make oboe reeds, and first of all here is a list of the equipment that you'll need if you want to have a go. First of all, you need some gouged and shaped cane like this, and then before you do anything else, put it in some water so it will soak. As you can see, I've already got some in there already, as it takes a while for the cane to get supple enough to use making the reed. Secondly, you'll need your reed making knife. This is mine. I'm right-handed and I use the wedge shaped knife, not the cutthroat one. So obviously I'm right-handed, that works for me. If you're left-handed, you'll need a left-handed knife. Then I've also got a rough scraping knife. The one I prefer to use is a Stanley cutting knife with heavyweight blades in it, and once the blade gets dull, you can chuck it away and put a new one in. Then we move on to a mandrel. I use a glottan mandrel, and I use it for making sure the staples are the correct measurement. You will also need a plaque or tongue, which goes in the reed while you're scraping. I prefer to use the German or nickel silver ones, the convex shape. Then we need some staples to tie the reed onto. These are new ones and they're Pisoni. Alternatively, you can use your old staples, which need preparing, and I'll show you how to do that shortly. Some tying on twine, whichever your favourite colour is. I will tie it on with a red so you can see how I do it, but I usually use blue. And this is Gutama thread, which I think they call it button thread or carpet thread. Anyway, Howarths sell it. A cutting block, which is what you use for cutting the end off the reed after you've rough scraped it to get it the right length. A decent ruler with millimetres on. I use millimetres, and that's for getting various measurements right. I use cellulose dope to seal the twine on the reed to make it firm and airtight. Some people prefer to use clear nail varnish, which isn't as strong but perhaps gives you a nicer colour. And last but not least, some gold beater skin, which is basically fish skin, which goes on the reed at the end to make sure it's airtight. If you can't get that, some people use cling film, which also works. So that's all the equipment. So I'm going to clear everything out the way and I'm going to show you how to prepare your staples. So if you're using new staples, the important thing is to make sure they are all the same measurement. They should, being new. So with your ruler, get it on the right bit, measure it to make sure it's 47 millimetres. That's the standard length, 47 millimetres. Then I get my mandrel. Some people use the mandrel for holding the reed while they're tying it on. I don't. I just use it for measuring to make sure the bore of the staple is the same on all my staples, so I get consistency when I'm making the reeds. So I'll pop that in there. It comes exactly to the end, so I'm happy with that staple. And similarly with the other staples. If you're going to use an old reed and do what we call a recane, the first thing you have to do is strip off the old reed on the top, the old cane. So using the rough scraping knife, Just run it down the back like that, minding your fingers of course, and that should just come off like that. Then you discard that bit. Now because this reader's been played many times, the chance are there's a lot of gunk up the inside, so I always make sure that I clean the staple before I reuse it. So with a glass of water, warm water is probably better, and I've got a little brush that happens to fit. In it goes, and if you're really lucky it's clean. If not, you'll see a lot of gunk coming out into the water. That one wasn't too bad. So it's now clean. I will measure it to make sure this one is 47 millimeters. So we're getting consistency, it is. And then likewise, use the mandrel to make sure you've got the correct bore. You may have to push it a little bit. That's now the correct bore. It comes directly to the top, so I know that that staple is identical to the new staple and any other staples I'm using. So hopefully that gives you consistency when you're making your reeds. So we've cleaned and prepared the staple, so we'll get rid of this and this, and we don't need the mandrel anymore. And the next thing we're going to do is measure the cane we've soaked earlier, and what I call paring down the ends, which is basically just chopping a bit off here, whoops, and here, so it lies better on the staple. So to do that, you need your rough scraping knife, and we just do this. There you are, like you're sharpening a pencil, just at that end, and there. And that helps it lay on the staple better. We then need to know where the staple is in relation to the reed, because you don't want it up there and you don't want it down here because it will fall off. I get the staple just to show you, so it needs to be at in the correct position. And I do that by measuring 27 millimeters from here down to there. So with quite a hard pencil and your ruler, put the ruler there, so the left hand side's right opposite where the cane goes across, and measure across 27 millimeters and mark it with your pencil like that. So when we put it on the staple, it'll be in the correct position. You'll know where the staple is. I'll put this back in the water now because we don't want it drying out. So we can get rid of the ruler for a minute. And next thing to do is to tie the twine on to whatever you're using to hold it firm. I'm lucky, I've got a hook here, but you don't want to put that in your dining room table. So the traditional way to do it is either to put it on the back of a chair or to the door handle, but make sure nobody's going to open the door from the other side. I normally use blue, but I'm going to tie on red, so hopefully you'll be able to see better when I'm tying on. So I just drop that on the floor, and using a granny knot or any knot you like, put it on there. Okay, so that's firm. So when you're putting the cane on the staple, I'll use a new staple because it looks better. Bend it over. The staple is also oval, so don't put it on there like that. It needs to sit flat like that. So we put the staple up to where the mark is. Then we get our twine and wind it round. However, you will now find that one side will be closed and the other side's open. So you need to adjust it so it closes evenly on both sides. Now, if you grab hold of it, as you can see, the whole lot falls apart. So the most useful thing I've found, I'll put this back in the water, is a technique I call abseiling. So one hand you've got the reed and the staple here. With the other hand we want to use this thumb and finger, but we can't because we let the string go loose. So if you do that there, that enables you to use your fingers and thumbs of both hands whilst keeping the string taut so it doesn't fall off your reed. I'll show you again. So there, there, there. And I'll show you that more when we're actually making the reed. But that's the technique. There, there, there. And that holds it firm while I'm using my thumb and forefinger. Okay, so now we'll tie on the reed. We'll take our staple. We'll take our bit of gouged and shaped cane that's marked. I'm putting it on the flat side, not the pointy side. Put it on there, hold it with finger and thumb. If you're left-handed, obviously this is all the other way around. So the mark that we put on the cane earlier is absolutely correct with the top of the staple. Now, this is where we tie it on. So we start 2 or 3 turns below where our mark is. And as you can see, I've already abseiled. I'll do it again like that. So I'm holding it firm so I can see what's going on, and you can see that that side is closed. Actually, it's not bad, and that side's a bit open, but what we'll do is just gently loosen it off, and I'm wiggling it. So now that side is closed. If you do it too far, that side's closed and that side's open. So it's just got to fiddle around till you get both sides closing correctly. And also just check that the staple hasn't moved and it's on that mark. I can see it's on the mark now. There we are. That's closed. That's open. So now I've got to fiddle it again. And it's worth taking a lot of time over this because your final reed won't be as good if it's not tied on correctly. Okay, I'm happy with that. So now I carry on up to the mark, but not past it. So I'm up to the mark. I now turn the reed towards me because I want to make sure, as you can see now, look, it's crooked. I don't want to read like that. So if it's a bit crooked, you put it back. So I'm happy that it's straight on there. And I turn it over, check the other side. Right, that's straight. The twine is on the mark. Now all I've got to do is carry on down the reed. Now the neater you do this, the better the reed will look better finished, but also the more airtight it will be, and the less likely it is that the whole thing will fall apart. Now when I've got here and I've got to the edge of the reed, I've now got a little gap, so I just fill in any little gaps and just do it as neat as possible. Actually this one isn't very neat. There you are, look, there's a gap there, so I'll just fill that in and carry on down the reed. Now I like to go all the way down to the bottom. Some people do it higher up, some don't. I go to the bottom, there we are, and that's on there. So now taking the rough scraping knife, I make a little loop into my fingers there. There's any way you can do this, well I'm not doing that very well. Little loop into there, and I cut through the twine. There we are. The bit that I've been tying on, I just put on my leg ready for the next one, or on the floor. And now we do a knot there, over and under and over, which is a reef knot, but it doesn't really matter. Then I like to put it round again and do another knot, just to make sure the whole thing isn't going to come apart, because you don't want it to come apart while you're playing Mozart's Oboe concerto. There we are. Actually I've cut that a bit short this time, so it's a little bit awkward, but it works, that's all right. There we are. Now give it a pull, good tug, make sure the whole thing is tight. Now just to finish that off, rough scraping knife again. Don't cut it too close, or the knot will come undone. I like to put it there, and I'll show you why later. Cut that bit off. Cut that bit off. And there is your tied on reed. If you're doing this perhaps for the first time, it's not a bad idea to check what you've ended up with. So I put my ruler there. I go up and I can see that the mark, the top of the twine is on 47, so I know I've not gone past the top of the staple. And if I look at the overall length of the reed, that's 74. So if you add 47 to 27, which was the thing we marked on there, we end up with a reed that's 74 millimeters long before it's finished. And if you get all your reeds like that, at least at this stage, you'll have consistent reeds. So now we got the tied on reed. I normally leave this overnight now to thoroughly dry out, so hopefully it will sit on the staple better. You can carry straight on if you want, but that's normally what I'll do. But before that, I'll rough scrape it. So I get my rough scraping knife again. This type of gouge and shaped cane has little ears on it where the shape has shaped it, just at the top there. You see it? So we want to get rid of that. So with the rough scraping knife, all I do is that, and on the other side, that. Then you've got straight sides. Now to rough scrape, I'll use the rough scraping knife, and what I'll do is I'll mark it with a pencil to show you what the cane I'm going to take off. Hopefully this will work. So there, and this bit at the front, but leaving the middle. So with the rough scraping knife, I'll go down here now. You can see what I'm going to try and take off. I take that bit off. I take that bit off. And then I take the end off. Now, you're supposed to do it like that. And as you can see, I've taken all the pencil off, but I've left the middle. Actually, I get more off by taking it off like again, sharpening a pencil, because we're going to cut this bit off anyway. And on the other side, down there, and take the end off. This enables the reed to sit better on the staple as it dries. I can take that bit further, and makes it easier to soak when you come to do the rest of the reed later on. So basically, that's what they call a V-scrape. It won't be a V-scrape eventually, but that's what it is to start with. Then I'll leave that overnight. So let's put that out the way. Here's one I prepared earlier, of course. Now we're going on to the blue. This one's been left overnight. It's dried out thoroughly. As you can see, the colour is lighter on when it's dried out. So the next thing I'm going to do is put cellulose dope all over the binding and get rid of this untidy bit here. The cellulose dope shrinks, so it will tighten that on there even more and will make it more airtight. So I'll get my cellulose dope. There we are. Open it up. Don't breathe in too deeply. Get a bobble on the end of my screwdriver here, or whatever you prefer to use. Put it around here, and now with these long whiskery bits, I've unfurled them a little bit. Put it on there. Alright, put this out the way, and just work it with your fingers, I do. Here we are. As I say, you can use clear nail varnish if you prefer. And when this is nice and wet, and you turn it round, turn it round, turn it round, those whiskery bits vanish magically. So it neatens it. Then basically I let the whole thing dry, as I say, overnight, or if I've just done it and it's been there overnight, I put it in the water, soak it so we're ready to start scraping and actually make the reed. So we put Put the top back on this, otherwise you'll be fainting from the fumes. That's it, that can go out the way. And there we are. I'll put that over there for the moment because we won't be using that one. Okay, so the reed now is all nice and hard from the dope, and I'm going to scrape it. Now, it's important that the reed is suitably wet, not soaking, but wet enough, because you don't want to start splitting the cane and so forth. So that seems to be all right. I usually shake out the water before I start. Get rid of it. So we've rough scraped it. So now we can use the reed knife itself. And to start with, I rough scrape more, but I don't put the plaque in. I'll show it later on. So here we are. What I'm going to do is thin down the end quite a lot and do a bit at the sides. And you do that on both sides. This is a bit foreshortened because it can take a while. There we are. I'm going around a nice moon because all this top bit's going to be cut off anyway. Like that. And down the sides. Now what I do is take the plaque and I insert the plaque through the side of the reed. Now this can be a bit fiddly. Oh, that one's gone in easily actually. Do it near the top because you don't want to damage the edge of the reed. So you insert the plaque through like that. There we are. Now I'm going to free the end by pulling it like that. And you'll soon see if you've tied it on properly, as it'll all come unraveled. So there we are. Look, I'm going to take that through there. There, that's come through. So now I can carry on scraping with the plaque in the end. Obviously that supports the reed more when you're scraping it. Keep your reed knife clean. So now basically I'm taking down the end. So it's nice and thin. I'm coming quite a long way back, as I say, because this is going to be cut off. There we are. Down the sides a little bit. And now I'll probably take that bit out as well. But don't take too much, because that's what they call the heart of the reed. It just depends on your style of reed. Mine is a U scrape when I finish, so it's a U shape there. Americans do a W scrape and all sorts of things in between. Remember to do both sides, of course, because you want to try and get it evenly done. You want both sides to be as even as possible. So round the top, round the side, and take a little bit of the back. If you're really lucky at this point, should you want to, you will get a noise, which is encouraging at least to show that it actually works. Okay. So when I'm happy that the end is nice and thin, I will then, I'll do a little bit more on it, get the cutting block and cut the end off. Now the length of reed I use is 71 millimeters. But there's all sorts of things in between. Some people use 72, 73, or even down to 70. It depends on you, your oboe, your style of reed, all sorts of things. No two players do the same thing. As I say, this is how I make oboe reeds. This works for me. It may work for you, may not. Perhaps you need to do a different length. So there we are. That's quite thin now. I'm quite pleased with that. That's okay. So, normally what I do is I get my measure, measure it to 71, and I can usually see where to cut it off, to be quite honest, but for the purpose of this, I'll put a pencil mark on so you can see. So, there we are with the pencil, and it's probably a good idea to do this so you know that you've got the right length. So that's at the end, and I go up, I can see where 71 is, and I just put a little pencil mark. So I know I'm going to get my reed to the length I want. It's no good if you've got all your reeds different lengths, because you're going to get lots and lots of different results. And the reeds are inconsistent enough anyway. There's my reed. That's my cutting block. This is probably the only potentially dangerous bit of making reeds. So with the rough scraping knife, and you must be careful, we put the knife on the block. The knife's on the block, look, and I'm rocking it. We then put the reed under the knife, so it's on that mark, and just hold it on the knife. Now I don't know if you better see this, but I like to look in the blade to see the mirror image of the reed, because if it's like that, I'm going to get a twisted end, to make sure that when I cut it, the actual tip is absolutely straight. I'm happy with that. Now I use 2 hands, and you need to be careful, you don't want any accidents, and this will then drop on the floor, but don't worry about that. There we go, 1 cut, reed goes on the floor, pick it up, here we are, there's the end. We can discard that. You can see how much has actually been cut off, which is quite a lot actually, so that comes off. There we are, I'm just about on the mark. So now it looks more like an oboe reed. I like to cut the corners off at this point. So again, this time I put the reed on the block. And remember, you can always cut more off, but if you take too much off, you can't put it back. So I just do the tiniest amount there, and on the other side of the reed, there. And it just neatens the sides up. Actually, they're very small. You can see that's about right on that side, actually. And it stops the reed fraying, which it does sometimes. And I just think it looks neater. So there we are. So now we're got the reed to the right length and everything. So basically now all we've got to do is scrape it until the reed works properly. I sometimes leave the reed now because I'm normally making a batch of about 12. And to be quite honest, making more than 1 reed at a time is easier because you get a bit of a swing of it. And if one of them goes wrong, if you spent all the time making 1 reed and it goes wrong, you've wasted all that time. Whereas if you've made 3 or 4, at least the other 3 are okay. So just clean the knife. Just a basic thing of carrying on, scraping down. We want the tip as thin as possible. For sides or rails, a little less thin, and leaving the heart. I'll try and show it when I've finished it. So this can take a long time, it can take a short time, depends on the cane and how you're doing. So make sure the reed is still moist. It mustn't dry up down. So also it's not a bad idea to check if the reed is actually airtight. I don't know if you can hear that pop, which that one is. If it isn't, it's not the end of the world, but if it is airtight, then you know you're on a more or less a winner, and you can blow it as well if you want. There's no air coming out of that, or you hear or something. So that's good. So in we go again with the plaque, and get rid of the cutting block now. And the important thing is the tip. So I'm going around like in a half moon with my arm like that, so the tip becomes very thin. This is the most laborious bit in a way, and be careful you don't try too hard, because of course you can damage it. I'm taking some out the side there, some out the side there, and a very small amount at the tip. Perhaps I can show you if I mark it with my pencil again. I'll do it on the other side. So there's the tip. That's what I call the tip. That bit. Okay, so let's just take that away. There we are. There we are. Obviously make sure your knife is nice and sharp. If it's blunt, you can end up splitting the cane, or it won't. Scrape it as well. Then I'm going to take a bit out the rails, just there. So that one, look, there we go. That one. And then this is the heart in the middle. You generally want to leave that alone, but sometimes you just need to take a little bit out of there. So if I colour in that heart again, there we are. I'll show you what I'm normally scraping. So I'm doing this all the way around there. Actually, I've taken a bit of it out, but I'm not going too far back. Okay, not a bad idea every now and then to have a look and see how thin the tip is, because obviously when it gets to a particular thickness, then the reed is going to work to how you want it to. Right, just do a little bit more on this and we'll have a go, see what it's doing. Let's see if it works. Right, it's very hard, but it does make a noise of sorts. So again, I might leave this now overnight to settle down. Let's just get some more out so we can get a decent sound out of it, or a sound. But again, remember, you can take more out, but you can't put it back again. So if you've taken too much cane off when you're making it, and the reed becomes too soft for you, and you don't like the sound, it's a bit quacky, then you can't put it back again. So it's better to leave it a bit hard and then scrape it down again, rather than going too far too soon. Now I've taken quite a lot out the tip now, so I'll just finish that back off a little bit. Let's see what it's doing. Ah, that's a bit more like it. Is it airtight? Yep. Right, so that now works. I'm pleased with that. So before I finish it all off, I'll put some gold beater skin on it. That's just to go around there, and that's just to make sure it is airtight. Actually, this one is, but I've always played with gold beater skin on, so I always put it on. So I'll just put that there. Take your gold beater skin, and as I say, you can use cling film if you want. It's not a bad idea. Some people don't like the idea. I think this is fish skin or something. I think they're plastic now, so I just cut a bit off. What's that? 1/2 inch by 1 inch, something like that. Like a very small plaster, isn't it, really? Something like that. So here it is. That's going to go around. I lick this just to get it moist. And be careful, because you normally only get one chance with this stuff, otherwise it screws up in the ball. So I'll put that on round there. I'm going to lick the other side, gradually move it round. There we are. And actually, once it's on there, you can then start pulling it a bit tighter. There we are. Okay. That's on there. I'm not even sure you can see it. That's okay. Now again, I would leave that to dry personally, because what I like to do, as it may happen to you, the gold beater skin keeps coming off and it's a real pain, or you have to replace it and muck around with it. So I like to cover it with a bit of cellulose dope. And again, if you're worried about that, you can always use a bit of clear nail varnish. So let's assume that's dry, because it's better to put it on when it's dry. We open up our cellulose dope. There we are. Let's get a little dobble of it onto there, and I go round with it, and that should seal the gold beater skin onto the reed. And obviously you must let that dry. You don't want to get it on your mouth wet, that's not very pleasant, but once it's dry, it's completely inert as far as I can tell. It's never hurt or damaged anybody. So there we have, in effect, the finished reed. I don't think I could probably play on it yet. I'll get my oboe out in a second and give it a go, and we'll see what we got. So now you've got through all your scraping, hopefully, and with any luck you'll get a decent squeak. That's okay. And normally speaking, you're after a decent crow. which is normally shows the reeds about right for playing, and then you can adjust it as you need to after that. I'm just going to show you with a torch how I've scraped it to give you an idea. So I'll put a torch through here and you should be able to see how the reed has been scraped, and it should be very thin at the tip, less thin on the sides, and you can probably see a bit of a spine down the middle. I don't think that's a particularly neat reed, but that's the thing you're basically aiming at, and then you can compare that with other reeds you made or with reeds you like if you're trying to copy and try and get the same result. So the only thing to do now is to try it in the oboe and see if it actually works. So there we are, give it a squeak. This is probably a bit tight in here because it's a new staple. Well, that's in. Right, let's see if I can get a sound. So that seems to work, doesn't it? And obviously when you're testing it, make sure your low notes are okay. And obviously go to a top. And that's not bad. I would leave that now and think that tomorrow I can scrape it down, and no reason why that shouldn't be a very playable and useful reed. I hope that's been of some use to you, and I encourage you to do it yourself, because only you know what your oboe reeds are like and what suits you. No two oboe players are the same, as you probably know, and actually it's a lot cheaper. And if you're relying on a reed maker who unfortunately one day will pass away, you then won't have a supply of reeds. So have a go yourself, and I look forward to seeing you on another occasion.